How eggshell color proves most people judge quality by appearance alone. You've seen this 1,000 times in the grocery store. A carton of brown eggs sitting next to a carton of white eggs. The brown ones cost more. Everyone notices. Most people assume the price difference means something real. That brown eggs taste better, have thicker shells, or come from happier chickens. But there's a secret hiding inside that price tag, and it has almost nothing to do with what's actually inside the shell. Stay with me through this video, because the real reason brown eggs cost more will overturn everything you think you know about how pricing actually works in the food system. If you've ever wondered why the grocery store seems designed to confuse you, subscribe and drop a comment below telling me what confused you most the last time you were buying eggs. I'm genuinely curious. Listen, the color of an eggshell is determined by one thing and one thing alone: the breed of chicken that laid it. That's it. A Rhode Island Red chicken lays brown eggs. A Leghorn lays white ones. A Silky lays green-blue ones. The color is baked into the bird's genetics, like eye color in humans. The pigment gets deposited onto the shell during the final hours before the egg is laid. But here's what matters, and this part is critical. The color tells you absolutely nothing about the nutritional content of what's inside. Hold on, I need you to lock in for a second, because this next part is where the real deception lives. The USDA tested this multiple times. Brown eggs and white eggs have identical protein content, identical fat profiles, identical mineral content. The yolk color doesn't change, the white doesn't change. Breaking open a brown egg versus a white egg reveals nothing that your taste buds could ever tell apart, and a laboratory test would find them biochemically equivalent. Yet brown eggs cost roughly 30 to 40% more. Why? Here's the thing nobody mentions at the register. It's about chicken size and feed economics. Breeds that lay brown eggs, Rhode Island Reds, Wyandottes, Orpingtons, are larger birds. They require more food to maintain their body mass. They need bigger facilities. They eat more grain, more water, more resources to produce the same egg that a smaller white egg-laying Leghorn produces. A Leghorn is a lean machine, genetically selected over a century to convert feed into eggs with ruthless efficiency. A Leghorn eats less, weighs less, and produces eggs just as nutritionally complete as a bird that weighs 5 pounds more. The egg itself doesn't cost more. The chicken does. The farmer spent more money feeding and housing that bird. Those costs get passed to you. Brown eggs aren't better eggs. They're expensive eggs because they come from expensive chickens. But then something strange happened in American grocery stores around the 1960s and 1970s. Consumers started associating brown eggs with farms, with tradition, with a pastoral image of hens pecking in a yard. White eggs, meanwhile, became the symbol of industrial agriculture, mass production, chemical farming. The color became a marketing problem. Grocers realized they could charge more for brown eggs, not because the chickens were inherently superior, but because people would pay more for the story the color told. The pricing gap widened, marketing deepened, and now, 50 years later, millions of people walk into supermarkets and make purchasing decisions based on a completely arbitrary visual preference that was deliberately cultivated by the industry. This is where it gets truly important. We're not talking about eggs anymore. We're talking about how you make decisions about quality in every single category you buy: food, clothing, tools, electronics. Your brain learned a shortcut early on. Darker color equals premium. Higher price equals better. Larger size equals superior. These aren't universal truths. They're learned associations. And they were taught to you by people whose job is to move inventory and maximize margin. The egg carton is just one place where this pattern shows up. It's everywhere. Premium olive oils are darker green. Expensive coffee beans are darker brown. High-end chocolate is darker. Your mind sees darkness and richness and immediately codes it as luxury. But darkness is just pigment. It's just chemistry. And someone somewhere understood that you'd pay more for that visual information than for the actual substance underneath. Here's what I want you to notice. The farm where I'm going to show you this secret is probably not what you expect. A factory farm producing millions of eggs annually looks nothing like the pastoral image in your head. No red barns, no rolling hills, no farmer named Earl tending his flock at dawn. What you'll find instead is industrial infrastructure designed with one principle in mind: efficiency. Absolute, ruthless efficiency. Every decision made inside those buildings is calculated to reduce cost and maximize output. And that includes, yes, the color of the eggs themselves. The birds that lay white eggs are white leghorns. They're smaller, they eat less, they reach egg-laying maturity faster than their brown egg-laying cousins. From a purely economic standpoint, a white leghorn is a more efficient machine. It converts feed to eggs with less waste. That's the only reason they exist in these numbers. Not because white eggs taste different, not because they're somehow inferior or superior, simply because the bird's operating cost is lower. The bird's feed consumption is measurable and predictable. The mathematics work. Brown eggs come from larger breeds, Rhode Island Reds, Plymouth Rocks, Sussex chickens, bigger birds, bigger appetite, slower to mature, higher feed cost per egg. From an industrial farming perspective, they're inefficient, yet they're more common in certain regions. Why? Because regional preference creates regional supply chains. In New England, people grew up buying brown eggs. In the Midwest, white eggs dominated. Neither preference was based on anything real. Both were based on what was available and what people got used to seeing. Before we continue, I need you to hold something specific in your mind. Eggshell color and egg quality are entirely separate variables. The shell is produced by a layer of tissue in the hen's reproductive tract. It's made of calcium carbonate. The pigments that color it brown are applied at the very end of the laying process, literally minutes before the egg exits the bird. Those pigments have zero relationship to what's inside. Zero. A white egg and a brown egg from the same breed of chicken, fed the same diet, raised in identical conditions, will be chemically and nutritionally identical inside. The only difference you can see is the outside. Yet people consistently rate brown eggs as higher quality. Studies have shown this repeatedly. Present the same egg to consumers in two different colored shells, and they'll assign higher quality scores to the brown one. Not because they taste it, not because they've analyzed it, but because the visual information, the color, triggered an association. Brown feels earthy. Earthy feels natural. Natural feels premium. Your brain did that work in milliseconds. You didn't consciously decide it. Price reinforces this loop. In markets where brown eggs cost more, consumers interpret the higher price as evidence of superiority. That interpretation becomes feedback that justifies the premium. Stores charge more because people expect to pay more. People expect to pay more because they see the higher price and assume it means something about quality. The price itself becomes part of the marketing. The circular reasoning is almost elegant. Farm eggs, free-range eggs, pasture-raised eggs, organic eggs, each category often comes in brown shells, not because brown shells mean better nutrition, but because brown feels more natural, more authentic, more expensive looking. The marketing language reinforces it. Rustic farmhouse imagery, weathered barnwood, sepia tones. All of it is designed to make you feel like you're buying something that came from somewhere real, somewhere pure, and you're paying a premium for that feeling. The actual nutritional differences between a factory farm white egg and a pasture-raised brown egg, they exist. A bird that spends time outdoors eating bugs and plants does produce eggs with slightly different nutritional profiles, higher omega-3 levels, more vitamin E in some cases. But those differences are modest, and they have nothing to do with the color of the shell. The yolk color, though, that's where people often conflate appearance with actual quality. A darker yolk does indicate a bird with access to better feed, more carotenoids from plants and insects. That orange-gold color is real information about diet. It's not marketing. But here's what gets overlooked. The shell color tells you nothing about what's inside. A pale yolk can come from a brown egg. A rich yolk can come from a white egg. The shell and the contents are entirely separate systems. The Leghorn chicken produces white eggs and happens to be extremely efficient at converting feed into eggs. Rhode Island Reds and Wyandottes produce brown eggs and are less efficient. Factory farms figured out decades ago that Leghorns were cheaper to keep, so white eggs became industrial. Brown eggs stayed associated with smaller operations. This created a market perception that persists today, even though many large industrial farms now use brown egg breeds specifically because consumers demand them. In the 1970s, white eggs dominated American grocery stores. Brown eggs were harder to find. They cost the same, sometimes less. But as natural and organic marketing emerged in the 1980s and 90s, brown eggs were reframed. They weren't just different. They were better, healthier, more ethical. The color became a visual shorthand for all those claims. Consumers saw brown and thought small farm. They saw white and thought industrial. Neither assumption was reliably true. Before we continue, I need you to hold on to something specific. This pattern, where appearance becomes proxy for quality, doesn't stop at eggs. It's everywhere: packaging, tools, appliances, the color, the material, the weight, the texture. All of it gets weaponized by designers who understand that your brain makes quality judgments in milliseconds before any rational evaluation happens. Take bread. A loaf in brown paper with visible seeds costs more than an identical loaf in clear plastic. The seeds might be marketing too, added for appearance, not function. A wooden-handled hammer costs 30% more than a steel-handled hammer that performs identically, because wood feels craft-like, purposeful. Industrial plastic feels cheap, even when it's engineered better for impact absorption. This is how manufacturers exploit visual judgment. They're not lying, technically, they're just activating your existing biases. Brown eggs cost more, they sell better. So farms keep producing them, consumers keep buying them, the premium persists. Everyone involved knows the color doesn't matter, but nobody's incentivized to correct the misunderstanding. The system maintains itself. The USDA has actually tested this extensively. Nutritional analysis of brown and white eggs from the same farm, same conditions, same diet. The shell color doesn't appear on the data sheet. It's not a variable that matters, but perception is so powerful that even when you tell people this, they often don't believe it. They've already made the association. Brown equals better. It's locked in. Some people reverse engineer their own justification. Well, brown egg breeds might be treated differently, maybe on some farms, but not systematically. A commodity brown egg from a massive operation gets the same treatment as a white egg from the same place. The machinery doesn't know the color. The feed doesn't change. The living conditions don't improve because the shell happens to be brown. What's genuinely interesting is why your brain does this. Why does color stick as a quality marker when the actual information contradicts it? Part of it is evolutionary. In nature, color variation in foods often does indicate something real about nutrient density. Ripe fruit is darker. Nutrient-rich plants have deeper colors. Your visual system learned to trust that signal. But we've applied that ancient heuristic to modern systems where it doesn't apply. A chicken's genetics determines shell color and body efficiency separately. The color became meaningless, but your brain kept trusting it. Brown egg hand rotating. Eggshell texture. The second reason is simpler and more troubling. Marketing works. From the 1950s onward, the egg industry wasn't uniform. Some producers wanted to charge more. They needed a visible justification. Brown eggs were easier to market as farm fresh or natural because they looked different. That difference was purely visual. But once consumers started paying more, the narrative solidified. If brown eggs cost extra, they must be worth it. The price itself became evidence of quality. Economists call this signaling. You're not paying for the egg. You're paying for the visible confirmation that you chose something better, and the industry knew this worked. Vintage grocery store shelves, egg cartons prices. What's worth pausing on is how resilient this belief has become, despite decades of nutritional science proving it wrong. A brown egg and a white egg, from the same facility, fed the same diet, housed in the same conditions, produce virtually identical nutritional profiles. Not similar, identical. The USDA tested this extensively. The FDA confirmed it. No meaningful difference in protein, fat, cholesterol, or micronutrients. Yet walk into almost any grocery store today, and you'll see brown eggs priced at a premium. Some stores mark them up by 30 or 40%. Nutrition facts labels comparison. Eggs. The price gap exists almost entirely because of what you see, not what you consume. This matters because it reveals something important about how you evaluate everything, not just eggs. Before we continue, I need you to think about this carefully. The same mechanism that makes you trust a brown egg is operating right now on nearly everything you buy. You're not immune to this. No one is. Supermarket aisle shopping crowd, product shelves, your eyes make judgments instantly, milliseconds, before your conscious mind has time to verify anything. That's not weakness. That's how brains work under real-world conditions. When you're standing in a grocery store with 50 choices in 8 minutes, you can't research each one. You rely on shortcuts. Color is a shortcut. Package design is a shortcut. Familiarity is a shortcut. These shortcuts usually work well enough. But they fail systematically when producers understand the shortcut and exploit it. Organic labels exploit this. Premium packaging exploits this. Natural claims exploit this. The visual signal suggests quality. So producers make the visual signal look premium while the actual product remains unchanged. Sometimes the actual product gets worse. Shrinkflation happens while the packaging gets more sophisticated. You're paying attention to the wrong variable. Hands opening egg carton, product packaging detail. The egg industry didn't invent this, they just demonstrated it perfectly. Pigmentation genes and performance genes are independent. The chicken that lays brown eggs doesn't automatically have better genetics for feed conversion or egg size or laying frequency. Those traits are selected separately. A brown egg breed and a white egg breed raised identically will have identical eggs. The genes that code for shell pigment are on a different chromosome from the genes that influence nutritional output. Yet knowing this changes almost nothing. Brown eggs still cost more. People still buy them believing they're better, and producers still market them that way because it works. The machinery of commerce doesn't punish you for being deceived if you keep buying. It rewards producers for understanding your visual bias better than you do. Farmer sorting eggs, hands brown white eggs. Before we continue, I need you to hold something in your mind for a moment. This isn't just about eggs. What we're looking at is a principle that repeats everywhere. The color of the shell became a signal your brain learned to trust. That signal has almost no connection to what's actually inside, yet your brain still fires the same way when you see it. Understanding why that happens, that's what separates someone who knows how markets work from someone who gets played by them. Grocery store shelves, egg display positioning. Supermarkets understood this decades ago. They didn't need a scientist to explain it. They could see it in their sales data. Brown eggs moved faster. Customers grabbed them first. They commanded a price premium that defied any measurable difference in quality. So shelf placement became part of the strategy too. Brown eggs got the prominent real estate. White eggs got pushed lower, less visible, positioned where the eye doesn't naturally travel. It's not malice. It's just economics responding to consumer preference. The preference itself was always the interesting part. Food manufacturers watch this same pattern constantly. They track what sells, what doesn't, and why. A product sells better when it's perceived as premium. The perception comes before the reality check. Most people never do the reality check. They buy, consume, and feel satisfied because the purchase validated their original assumption. That satisfaction is real, even if the superiority isn't. Egg production line, factory conveyor belt, industrial farming. The standardization of egg production changed something fundamental. Once eggs became an industrial commodity, they became measurable in ways they never were before. A large egg is a large egg. Grade AA is grade AA. The shell's appearance got locked into grading standards, but the appearance is just the easiest thing to measure. It's visible from across a room. It doesn't require equipment. A sorting machine can do it in fractions of a second. Quality traits that matter more. Internal cleanliness, the composition of the white, the strength of the shell membrane, those require closer inspection. They cost money to verify. So the industry settled on what was cheapest to assess. The shell color stuck around because it was already embedded in people's minds. It cost nothing to market. It just needed to be there visible, triggering that old association. Eggshell texture magnified, shell surface detail. The pigment itself is barely there. Protoporphyrin, that's the chemical compound responsible for brown color, exists in such a thin layer that you could wipe it off with a cloth. Some brown eggs, if you've ever noticed, have spots or streaks. That's not a defect, that's just uneven pigment deposition as the egg travels through the oviduct. The color variation you see has zero correlation with what's inside. Yet your eye interprets that variation as something meaningful. Variation suggests natural, suggests authenticity. Uniformity suggests industrial, suggests processed. Your brain makes that judgment automatically. It happens before conscious thought even arrives at the decision. Eggshell cross-section, microscopic structure, shell layers. The structure is identical. Calcium carbonate, protein matrix. Mineral composition, strip away the pigment and the shells are indistinguishable. A chicken's body doesn't work harder to produce a brown egg. It doesn't allocate more resources. The pigment gets added almost as an afterthought in the egg's journey down the oviduct. It takes no additional metabolic cost. It requires no additional nutrition from the bird. Some geneticists have argued that brown pigmentation actually represents a minor metabolic expense, meaning if anything, white eggs could theoretically be slightly more efficient to produce. Not that you'd ever measure a difference in taste, nutrition, or performance. The margin is negligible, but the direction of the logic is clear. Brown isn't superior, it's just more visible. Vintage family kitchen, retro grocery shopping, 1950s home. Somewhere around the mid-20th century, American consumers started preferring brown eggs. No documentary evidence explains why it started, no marketing campaign launched it, it just emerged. Some historians point to the rising popularity of Rhode Island Reds and New Hampshire chickens, both brown egg breeds, and suggest that availability shaped preference. Others note that brown eggs became associated with small farms and rural living, just as suburbs were expanding and people were feeling nostalgic for that aesthetic. Whatever the origin, the preference became self-reinforcing. Brown eggs sold better, so producers raised more brown egg breeds. So brown eggs became more available, so the preference strengthened. By the time anyone thought to ask whether they were actually better, the economic machinery was already built around the assumption that they were. Farmer hands egg sorting, barn morning light, egg carton packing. Grocery stores noticed this shift and capitalized on it immediately. Packaging designers began placing brown eggs front and center on shelves, while white eggs drifted to the back or lower shelves, a retail tactic called eye level is buy level. But they were also actively shaping what customers saw, which meant shaping what customers bought. The layout itself became a form of persuasion. Supermarket shelf eggs, grocery store aisle, 1970s retail display. Pricing followed immediately. Since brown eggs sold faster, producers could charge more for them. A dozen brown eggs might cost 15 cents more than white eggs. Not enormous, but enough to signal that something was different, something was better. That price gap was the final proof most people needed. Economics had converted preference into fact. If brown eggs cost more, they must be worth more. The circularity was complete. Now here's where I need you to hold on for a second, because what happened next reveals something fundamental about how humans evaluate quality. Brown egg-white egg comparison, cracked eggs, identical yolks. Scientists began testing whether brown eggs actually tasted different or contained different nutrition. They didn't. The yolk color, the protein content, the taste, all identical between brown and white eggs of the same quality grade, identical. Yet surveys showed that people eating brown eggs in blind taste tests reported preferring them. They said brown eggs tasted richer, more authentic, more like what an egg should taste like. The same people eating the exact same white egg reported it tasted paler, less satisfying, less genuine. The only difference was the color of the shell. Organic packaging label, farm fresh eggs, vintage food label design. Marketing departments understood this perfectly. They began printing images of pastoral farms on egg cartons, red barns, rolling fields, happy hens in sunlight. None of these images necessarily matched where the eggs actually came from. A carton of brown eggs from an industrial facility might display a watercolor painting of a 19th century homestead. The story on the package wasn't describing the product. The package was selling a feeling, a narrative, a fantasy of authenticity that had nothing to do with the egg itself. And it worked with devastating efficiency. Consumers paid premium prices for brown eggs, not because the eggs were superior, but because the eggs were brown. The color had become a proxy for quality, for tradition, for nature itself. The shell had become the message, but the message was entirely invented. Grocery store egg section, various egg cartons, modern supermarket shelf quality. What made this possible was something psychologists call appearance bias, the tendency to judge quality by how something looks, rather than how it actually performs. We see something that appears premium, and we assume it is premium. We pay accordingly. Our brains treat appearance as evidence, as if the look itself proves something true about the interior. Vintage chicken farm, industrial poultry, modern egg marketing imagery. This isn't unique to eggs. It explains why we assume expensive coffee tastes better than cheap coffee before we taste it, why luxury car brands include metallic paint options that cost 5 times more than solid colors, even though there's no difference in durability or protection. Why restaurants plate food with careful attention to color contrast and visual balance, knowing that how food looks affects how we taste it neurologically. Appearance isn't decoration. Appearance is a product feature. We're simply not aware that we're buying it. Hand-holding egg carton comparison, kitchen table. And this is where I need to bring you back to the question I asked you at the very beginning. I promised you a specific revelation about what eggshell color actually reveals. Not about the chicken, not about nutrition, but about you. Grocery store shopping, egg in bowl, yolk examination. Your choice of eggshell color is a direct measurement of how much your brain has been trained to conflate appearance with quality. That's the secret. Brown eggs don't taste better because they're brown. They don't contain more nutrition because they're brown. They cost more because centuries of agricultural marketing successfully convinced consumers that the exterior appearance of a food product is evidence of its internal value. And you believed it because everyone else did, because your parents did, because the supermarket arranged them that way. Product packaging premium, expensive labels, marketing design. This pattern repeats across nearly every consumer category you interact with. Packaging that looks intentional and expensive costs more than packaging that looks utilitarian. Bottles that feel heavier in your hand are perceived as higher quality, even though the weight is just the thickness of the glass. Food dyed with natural colors costs more than food dyed with synthetic colors, even though the natural versions are often less stable and fade faster. Your brain doesn't evaluate these products, it evaluates their presentation, and then it constructs a story about why the presentation matters. Shopping decision, hand-reaching shelf, customer satisfaction. Here's what makes this genuinely important. You're not flawed for doing this. Your brain evolved to use visual shortcuts because they work often enough to be useful. A shiny apple probably was fresher than a dull one. An animal with bright coloring probably was healthier than a pale one. These heuristics kept your ancestors alive, but they also made them vulnerable to manipulation. And that vulnerability scales perfectly with every dollar spent on advertising and package design. Vintage supermarket shelves, modern grocery display, colorful packaging wine. So the chicken that laid the brown egg didn't suddenly gain access to better nutrition in the 1970s when brown eggs began selling for a premium. The chicken's genetics didn't change, the chicken's diet didn't change. The only thing that changed was the story consumers were told about what brown eggs represented. And once that story was established, it became self-reinforcing. People bought brown eggs because they were expensive, and they cost more because people bought them. Marketing created a cycle that had nothing to do with actual quality. Notebook writing, comparison columns, pen check marks. This is the part that still bothers me, frankly, because once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. Every premium product you buy from this point forward, you'll question whether you're paying for the thing or paying for the story about the thing. And sometimes, the answer will be that you genuinely prefer the premium version. That's fine. The problem is when you don't know you're making that trade-off, when you assume appearance is evidence rather than marketing. Comparison shopping, product label, customer realization. The eggshell didn't evolve to be brown. Humans evolved to respond to brown as a signal of something valuable. Chickens simply followed. And once we understood that visual shortcut in the human brain, we weaponized it. We built entire industries around it. We still do, every single day. Supermarket wide shot, grocery store aisles, product displays. So here's what I want you to actually do with this. The next time you buy something specifically because it looks premium or costs more than the alternative, pause for a second. Ask yourself what you're actually paying for. Is it the product or the presentation? Is it the quality or the story? Sometimes the answer will be both, but at least you'll know you're making the choice consciously, rather than letting your brain's ancient wiring make it for you. Unpacking groceries, holding eggs, kitchen counter. Thank you for watching. If this explanation changed how you think about something you buy regularly, I'd genuinely like to hear about it. Leave a comment below, and if you want to see more of these everyday mysteries solved, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss when we upload something new.